Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Greetings and welcome back to Meditations. I'm your host, Ryan Slomak, and if you're coming back and you're here for more, I really appreciate you coming back to this little auditory playground. If you're here for the first time, welcome to my show. This is a show all about making space for conversations with interesting people, and it is an absolute joy and privilege to have you here. On top of it being a joy and privilege, it's also a monumental episode. This is episode 10. We've made it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes, and each one I just keep getting more and more thankful for. This one in particular, I wanted to have some way to celebrate this sort of monumental moment, so we are traveling all the way across the sea to the UK to interview Tim Allen. Tim Allen is a stop-motion animator who is huge in the industry. He's known for working on Tim Burton's The Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie. He's worked with Wes Anderson on The Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs, and his performances have won Academy Awards for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Currently, he just finished up working with Sam Fell, the director of Paranorman, who recently made Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget, which is going to be opening on Netflix on December 8th. So getting Tim here to chat about all things stop motion is an absolute pleasure. We talk about things like imposter syndrome, how he got started in the industry, thinking about animators as actors, communicating effectively with different directors, teaching skills to others, and most importantly, just having a conversation about being thankful for the creative spaces we find ourselves in. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Here is Tim Allen. So Tim, thanks so much for joining. As I look over your whole filmography, it's just fascinating to me. And I've heard you talk about this in interviews before, but just the fact that like stop motion still very actively plays a role in our lives. And I guess what I'm curious about for you is like when you were a kid, when you were kicking things off, like how did you initially get introduced to the medium of stop motion animation?
Oh wow, God. Well, thanks for having me, Ryan. How did I? When did I? I think the first thing I remember that was stop motion, because of course I had Disney films, and the other thing, Disney would have been a big thing that would have been on the TV a lot when I was younger. Stop motion animation with models, with puppets, would be this really obscure thing called Chorlton and the Wheelies, which was these. You'd have to look this one up on YouTube, but Chorlton and the Wheelies, they were little characters with wheels that would just move around on a tabletop with a witch with a completely over the top Welsh accent. It was barking mad. And frankly, if you look at it today, it looks rather drug induced. But that's my first memory of stop motion. And then it would be things like Wind in the Willows, the stop motion feature film made by Cosgrove Hall in the 80s, and I'd watch that went off into a spin-off, a load of TV series. I'd come home from school watching that, and that would lead forward into Postman Pat. That was another. I don't know if that came to the States. That was huge in the UK. A children's television show, and Fireman Sam. And then when I was becoming an art student, it was Nightmare Before Christmas became huge. So in terms of the medium that I do now, stop motion animation, those would be the main influential ones. Oh, and Morph. No, really early memory of mine is Morph, Aardman Animations, on a British arts and crafts program called Tony Hart's Art Club. And Morph is just a little ball of plasticine on a tabletop who makes he doesn't really talk in a legible voice, but these are all the really nostalgic memories to me. Some of them will have come to America and some of them won't.
But I think that's half the fun of like children's television. Is I love the fact that you described it as reviewing it now, it seems fairly drug induced, which is, I think that's the nice thing about children's programming, especially on that sort of like lower budget stop motion scale, is that you've got these people who are like, all right, we need to entertain kids. Our budget is this much. Let's take some risks and see what sticks. And I always feel like that's the reason that those are the ones that stay with us.
And I think back then it was a bit more maverick as well in terms of what would be censored or regulated. And these things were made by a much smaller team of people, often just a few people. in a shed at the back of the garden, pretty much, doing things in a very spontaneous, uncontrolled way. And I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but now that I am a long time professional stop motion animator, one of the biggest joys that I have is I have worked with the director of Wind in the Willows, animating for him. I've worked with animators who did Children of the Wheelies and Nightmare Before Christmas. And the director of Postman Pat actually was also the director of the Wind in the Willows. So when I've done the reincarnation of Postman Pat and Fireman Sam years later, and then Tim Burton films years later, to work with the guys that did those original things that inspired me, I'm like the young kid who's like, oh my God, that thing that I watched as a child, and you actually did it, and I want to hear all these stories about what it was like to work on and how bad health and safety was back in those days, or how much free reign they had. And the bizarre thing is, now I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I'm getting kids coming up to me, and things that I worked on when I started, they were 3, 4, 5 years old when they watched them. So they have the same reaction about stuff that I've worked on that I had looking at Children of the Wheelies, looking at Nightmare Before Christmas, looking at Wind of the Willows. So I really get that. It's a bit of a circle of life thing.
Absolutely. And before we get too far into your career, I'm curious about, in your other interviews, you've talked about the fact that like you knew pretty early on that you wanted to do something arts related, but you weren't 100% sure that you wanted to go into stop motion. And I'm wondering how you kind of came to that discovery that, stop motion was the place for you, like to use. Stop motion's an interesting medium because like not only do you have to have like an aesthetic understanding, you have to have like an Olympic grade version of your own patience to be able to work at that speed. So I'm just curious how you eventually discovered to yourself that like that was the medium that you wanted to work in, because you went to college for it, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, as a young kid watching these programs, it never occurred to me this was something I could do as a job, even though evidently there must be people, there's names on the credits, there must be people making these TV programs. It didn't occur to me. Even when I left school, and to be clear, in England, school, you're 16 when you finish school. And then you go to college 16 to 18, and universities 18 onwards, in the English system. But leaving school, we knew enough that I wasn't going to generalize. I was going to focus on art, because I'd been drawing and doing cartoons as a kid nonstop. You couldn't stop me drawing characters and little interactions. So we knew art, but realistically, I was absolutely lost as to where that was going. I was definitely directionless. And at 16 to 18, I did a 2-year course in general art and design. It was a mix of fine art, fashion, graphics, 3D. 3D back then, by the way, was not computers. It was 3-dimensional space and objects. So a bit of sculpture, a bit of architecture, a bit of spatial design. That was the bit that drew me. So I was more drawn to the 3-dimensional space, but we were looking for universities, and I was clueless. I really didn't know where this was going. I was doing the briefs, the projects, because the tutors gave it to me as a project. But I wasn't self-motivated or focused as into this is what I want to do. This is what I'm curious in. So it was looking like I was heading down the route of model making. I liked making things with my hands. Maybe product design, and I was looking at model making courses at university. Nothing had captured me, nothing I was passionate about. And I was in the waiting room at a university and for a model making course, and someone poked their head around the door, and so I'll never forget, they said, "Is anyone here to see the animation course?" And I went, "Oh, really? You can do that? Oh, yes, I'll go." And I looked around the course, and it was all drawn. It was 2D animation, not stop motion, but it was enough to make me think, wow, oh my God, this is for me. And the fact that a couple of years before that, I'd loved Nightmare Before Christmas. I got the behind the scenes book. with all the people crawling on the sets, drilling holes in the floor, manipulating the puppets, holding the puppets in their hands. The idea of animation with models, it was this, wow, aha, I found it. And I think I was very lucky to be 18 years old, and finding something where I went, wow, that's for me. That's what I have to do. It gave me a real drive, complete clarity. So that was the start of okay, how do I do this?
One of the themes that pops up on this podcast a lot, and just in general conversation with people, is the fact that like when you're directionless, obviously you're so anxious about making the right decision forward. And then if you just kind of get to that moment where you're like, I'm going to open myself up to the universe and sort of see what happens, 90% of the time you find yourself in these like weird avenues you never thought you'd get into. And I think about that quite often, just in the sense that like I'm currently broadcasting to you from my office, at the college I teach at. And the reason I'm here is because I sold graphic novels to somebody one day and happened to keep in touch with them. You never know how these different opportunities are going to present themselves. So like, I just love the fact that you're like, I don't know what I want to do. Does anybody want to take the animation course? Okay, my future has been set in stone now.
Yeah, and I think I was very lucky at 18 to find that. But I think there's a lot of a sense of anxiety or dissatisfaction in oneself that I should know what I want to do, shouldn't I? Shouldn't I find my thing? Shouldn't I find my calling? And people feeling quite incomplete and even worried about it until they've found that. And frankly, I think you go through life repeatedly changing direction, and as much of the things that happen to you are a bit of a right time, right place, or even wrong time, wrong place. So the fact that we find our goal and then determinedly steer ourselves towards it, knowing exactly what our intention is, I think there's very few people like that, and even that could be a bit obsessive. So I think we're kind of often wandering, meandering through life, and a few things fall into place and we think, oh yeah, I'll do more of that. Or the opposite, we have an experience that we hated so much we think anything but that, and change direction. So yeah, I think the idea that people know what they're doing is very, very rare. Much of the time I think we're figuring it out and making it up as we go along.
And the discovery of it is half the fun. One thing I was also curious about was just like your sort of family dynamic, right? You have what is it, Samantha and Chris are your siblings, and like did they have direction? I mean, your sister became a pro wrestler, so I'm curious about like as you're sort of figuring it out, where were they in these procedures? Like, were you leading the way, or were you just sort of like the lost puppy?
Well, I was the eldest. So I'm 2 years older than my brother, and I'm nearly 12 years older than my brother Chris, and I'm nearly 12 years older than my sister Sam. So Samantha was her original acting stage name, because just to differentiate that Samantha is a woman because Sam Allen could be a man. So when she was originally looking to get into acting, it was Samantha. So my brother's 2 years younger. He has had a much more straightforward path, which he would readily admit himself. He was like I was obsessive into drawing and creating characters. He was absolutely focused on numbers and maths, and he went off to do mathematics and further mathematics, and got headhunted after uni. And he's been an actuary. Actuaries figure out pension plans for large corporations. He's been doing that with the same company ever since he graduated. So he's had a very linear, different path to me and my sister, who have much more meandered, I suppose, because Sam started off going to draw. She was always on stage from when she was 4 years old, I think, her earliest stuff, and then went off to drama school in the after school as a young teenager, went off to performing arts school at university, graduated at 21, and was then doing the thing of trying to become an actor, singer, dancer, working in holiday parks. Originally, the big dream for her was to be on the West End in London, or in theatre, or maybe work on a cruise ship. That was pretty good money, so she thought, when she was 21, 22. And she ended up working in holiday parks, doing lots of singing and acting. And so it's more singing and dancing in front of holidaymakers. Had a bad experience, thought, I've got to get out of here, moved back in with me, was looking for acting gigs. One of the acting gigs offered to her happened to be a part as an extra in a film about wrestling. She did some wrestling classes to get ready for this role. Next thing you know, she's after 2 weeks of wrestling classes, she says to me, Tim, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I'm not going to follow acting and singing anymore. I'm going to keep training as a wrestler and train to be a professional wrestler. And I thought it was brilliant. but it shows you start off with certain ambitions. Maybe those ambitions, they're not working out, or they're not for you, and that's fine. And along the way, you find other things that you're good at and other things that you enjoy. And I think that's a never-ending path. And 9 years later, she is still a professional wrestler. She was hired by WWE for 5 years. The show she was on got cancelled, so she was released by them. And that's just over a year ago. She's now been a freelance wrestler all around Europe. She won another championship this weekend. So she's currently champion at 5 different companies. And I've got a lovely photo from her wedding where at the time she was a 4-time champion. She's there in her wedding gown, holding her 4 championship belts. So there's a contrast. But again, it just shows how life keeps going in different directions. And I don't think that will ever stop. I don't know if I could have predicted that I'd be still animating. Well, I went to uni in 1995. I told you I had an anniversary. It was tomorrow is going to be 24 years since I got my first paid professional animation job. So I'm about to hit 24 years as a professional animator. Could I have predicted that when I went to university the same year that Toy Story came out and everyone was saying that CGI was going to take over? Maybe not. And will I be animating in 20 years? Who knows what AI will do? Who knows? It will keep on moving. It will keep on changing direction, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I get a kick out of the fact. So as I was doing my research, I was, obviously able to find Sam and whatever, but Chris kept
Chris.
Yeah, I couldn't break his story. So the fact that he's an actuary, and this analogy I find really interesting, but the idea that like your career, animation comes from the Latin term anima, breathing life into things, soul, and then actuaries go through and review tables of the statistics about how you can die in different ways is such an interesting stark contrast. That's just fascinating within one family dynamic.
Hey, I'll tell you one thing that I think we all have in common, and that is working ethic. When we were all youngish, Mum had us out going to do a paper round to earn our own pocket money, and then jobs at the local sports centre. So the idea of trying to be there on time and to be very aware of what they're asking us to do in the job and trying to deliver what we're being asked to do, that was really put into all of us, as well as getting engaged with the community, getting involved. My mum really instilled that in all of us. So despite the differences, we do have an ethic of wanting to do a good job and wanting satisfaction from the job and being very aware of other people's needs. So there's a very common thread with us, despite what seems like very divergent careers.
No, there's definitely that clear through line of the Allen family. Because I think is your mom into marathon running as well? Like there's just such a fascinating, I don't know, just like nose to the grindstone kind of just emphasis in your family that I think is pretty cool. That obviously stretches itself into so many different directions.
Well, in terms of my mum setting the example, yes, this year she did her 30th London Marathon and probably last.
Hey. To me, that's 30. I've done zero. So she's got 30 more than me at this point. So I could be getting the anniversaries wrong. But I do want to talk about your breakout into the industry. So I've heard you talk about the fact that similar to most people, you go through college, you have these skill sets, you're going from one place to the other. You said you'd gone to every single and stop motion studio in the UK, and we're like, hey, will you hire me? And they're all like, well, not yet. We need to see these types of skill sets. And I know one of your first gigs was you ended up working for Aardman Studios, the creators of Morph, to do a Rice Krispies commercial. You were working in like you were making mouths, I believe, for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was. I popped, but I was going everywhere. I'd phone a company up, send my VHS show reel, phone them up again, try to arrange to go in with my portfolio, which was an excuse to meet them in person and show them a bit more of my model making work. It was a bit of a three-pronged attack for introducing myself to a company. And when I went to Aardman Animations, I popped in and to show my portfolio. It just happened they could do with an extra pair of hands to get a fairly mundane task done. It was pressing plasticine into molds. You put the plasticine out, and you got the shape of the mouths for the characters called Snap, Crackle, and Pop. The characters on the box of Rice Krispies, Kellogg's cornflakes. I painted the teeth white, put a little tongue in the mouth. I was only there for 4 days. I wouldn't have been paid very much. And I didn't work at Aardman again for about 8 years, as it turned out. But at least it gave me several days in a studio seeing how, well, you're just soaking up the atmosphere of how a studio works, really. And if anything, I think they were just being quite nice, giving me a chance to, I was paid, but it might as well have been work experience, really. The irony is, I was actually back in that very same room today because I'm doing some promotion for the new Chicken Run film. And it happens to be in the same room that I did that gig for the 4 days. And Enti, the guy that gave me that opportunity, he's still there now running the model making department. So it's quite amusing working with him as one of the lead animators these days, when he's the guy that gave me my first super junior trainee assistant model maker gig. It was a start, and it was bitty, but it was something, and I was desperate for anything at that point.
Awesome. And then, so what is this 24-year celebration? What are we now celebrating 24 years of?
Right. The bit that I count from is, because people say, when did you start animating? And you could say, well, I did it at home, or I did it at university. That's when I got my first paid job as an animator, because the Rice Krispies thing was making replacement mouths ready for someone else to animate. So it's a bit like, if you think of me as the actor on a movie, it's my first animation acting role, as opposed to just being on a movie set doing something. So yeah, my first show was El Nombre. It was for the BBC. It's a very low budget kids education show. So that's the thing where I really got to animate for a living, I would say, and things up and down bit by bit got going from there.
And that was like a 10-month position. I mean, it was a pretty lengthy something
Which is
like
great.
that.
Yeah, 10 months. I mean, I had to work really fast. I mean, we're animators are also, there's kind of a factory worker aspect to what we do. We've got to churn out, and I know this sounds hilarious, 24 seconds a day was what I had to do on El Nombre. That is a lot in animation terms. So for those that aren't au fait with animation, really, really low budget kids series, we might do 18 seconds a day. Fireman Sam was 10 seconds a day. Shaun the Sheep is 6 seconds a day. Pinocchio is about 1.5 seconds a day for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. So 24 seconds a day, you're working incredibly fast, trying to crank as much footage out as you can do. So the emphasis was not on quality, it was about getting it done, and I wasn't fast enough. But you're just doing it all day. So practice, practice, practice. And because they weren't expecting much in the way of high quality, so long as it basically told the story and did what it needed to, it didn't need to look great at all. But you're just doing hand gesture after hand gesture, head nod after head nod as the character talks. So you're repeat, 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 repeat. So you are, and you can make as many mistakes as you want, because unless it's absolutely unusable, it's going to be in the show. So I think I worked out in 2.5 months of doing El Nombre, I'd done as many hours animating as 3 years at university. And that gives you a sense of, by doing it every day, you're getting the practice hours in. We've heard about the 10,000 hours makes a master. Now, I was not that, but I was starting to get the hours in.
That's awesome. And when I want to come back to this idea about animator as actor in a little bit, but I guess the one thing I'm curious about is like whenever you start any new position, there's like that imposter syndrome is just like very real. And, you know, I mean, even as I'm talking to you right now, I'm like, did I teach today or did I just pretend I was teaching? I can't tell.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about for you, like how far into your career were you before you really felt like your skill set was something you were confident in?
I don't think there's a moment. There will be moments where you felt some validation from others, or you felt, hey, I managed to pull that off. There's moments of that. Oh, goodness, I would say even 10 years into my career, I still really felt, even 15 years into my career, I felt that I was still having to prove myself in a different way. Because just because you get good at one thing, unless you're doing that same thing all the time, and you want to expand your skill base, you're going to have to start doing things that you're less familiar with. And by the way, I don't want to be someone that gets good at something and then just keeps doing that, because yes, I might feel comfortable doing it, but I also think that's how you stagnate creatively, or stagnate in any practice, if you're just doing stuff you know how to do with your eyes closed. So I feel I'm deviating a bit from your question, but I don't think there's necessarily an end point where you know how to do everything or you feel you're proven. Even earlier this year, I was doing a dog run, and for Aardman, for a cider commercial. And Will, the director, asked me, he didn't want the dog to sprint, he didn't want it to trot, he wanted it to do a canter. I didn't know what a canter was. It's between a jog and between a sprint, something with a four-legged animal. So, and I didn't have time to practice, so we quickly looked online to go, okay, what's a trot? What's a sprint? What's a canter? What's a walk with a four-legged animal? Okay, right, that's what it looks like, is it? And I just literally had a video to kind of copy frame by frame. So there's no moment where you know how to do everything. So you're always coming into it with an aspect of, well, I've done similar things to that, but I'm not really sure how that works. I may not have any time to do any research. So there's going to have to be a little bit of a, well, let's get in there and give it a go. And we'll talk and we'll analyze as we go and make adjustments as necessary. So in terms of imposter syndrome, I think the big difference is I'm much less anxious about people realizing that I don't know what I'm doing, or people thinking I'm really good at what I'm doing. And I know that I know my limitations, and I'm terrified other people will realize them. I'm now much more accepting of the fact that I don't and will never know everything, but I'm quite happy to discuss different ways we could approach it, and hear what the director wants, hear other people's ideas, and we'll go with what we think is the best way forward. And if it isn't quite working out the way we hoped it would, we have a conversation as early as possible and make adjustments. So it's very different from the imposter syndrome of I feel that I'm a fraud, or I feel other people will realize that I'm a fraud and that I'm winging it. I'm going to tell you that I'm winging it. I'm much more open about that. And yeah, because you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to know everything. All you can do is try and um, you know what? I had a wonderful wonderful way for describing confidence. Confidence is not knowing what you're doing, although that really helps. Confidence is not pretending you know what you're doing, or this inbuilt innate skill. Confidence is saying, "I've got this," or "Leave it with me. I'll handle it." And it doesn't have to be that you're putting the wool over people's eyes. It's just, "Leave it with me. I'll figure it out."
99% of it is just being willing to say, I can problem solve this and kind of go from there. I do get a kick out of the fact that, I'm talking to an animator who's worked with some of the greatest directors of all time and, was part of a performance that won an Academy Award, who's like, well, I'm still just faking it, but I think I'm faking it better than I did 24 years ago. I'm also
more relaxed about. I'm more relaxed and open about it, and yeah, it's a much happier place to be.
That's awesome. So I think I guess I want to come back to this animator as actor thing, because I think it's something that we don't really consider a lot. Just as we consume media. Like one of the things that I find fascinating about stop motion right now is that we're in a time where consumption of media is at an all-time high. Okay, I watched that thing. It was okay. I watched the next thing. You're just cramming things into your brain. You're not really processing anything into it. But we're also at a time where like all these big directors are funding these films that are literally one frame at a time, as opposed to, can I get another take? Can I get another take? Can I get another take? And as we fail to let ourselves just think about the media that we're consuming, it also makes us not necessarily think about the way in which this media is made, and that the people that are animating these things truly are some of the greatest actors in the world. I mean, we talk about the 9 old men at Disney are arguably like some of the most important actors, in history. And I'm curious about, like, in your stop motion journey, when did you really start to recognize yourself as an actor? And as an animator, how are you utilizing these acting principles? Because clearly there's performance in your family, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I did the odd pantomime when I was a teenager as well. So I guess there was some don't say exhibitionist, because I actually felt very, very huge stage fright doing it. So I certainly wasn't someone that was wanting the spotlight or the attention, which is suited very nicely now, because an animator is the actor behind the puppet. So we're like the puppeteer that you don't actually see. You just see the puppet coming alive. And to be clear, for those that aren't quite sure what a stop motion animator is, I don't make the puppets or the sets or do the lighting. I'm the guy that moves the puppet, adjusts the eyes, adjusts the hand position, opens the mouth, and then takes a photograph. And I do that maybe 24 times to give you a second's worth of footage. So it's very much acting, but on a time delay. It's not like you're picking up Kermit the Frog and moving him around to the voice. Like I say, I might get 2 seconds in a day. So you're quite detached from the live performance, if you will, that we watch in the movie, and it goes by. Man, if you blink, you're going to miss 2 hours of my work. So caveat: no blinking when you're watching my films. But yeah, it's when did I first realize that I was an actor? I was always interested in the audience even from when I was a student. I was very aware of the audience's response, more to humor when I was a student. Is this funny? Have I given enough delay before I then give the gag, the punchline? So how am I delivering it is also very conscious of how are people receiving it. So that's probably the earliest part of me seeing this as a performance, as a story that's unfolding, or a joke that's being told, and what's the best way to tell a joke. And then I was getting more into subtlety as I was doing children's series, but you haven't got the time to get too much into it. I think the first time I really felt I was getting deeper into performance was when I was doing Corpse Bride for Tim Burton. And I landed on my feet that I fell into some shots with Barkis, who was voiced by Richard E. Grant, who is this, oh goodness, he's a psychopathic serial killer who's pretending he's English aristocracy, but he doesn't actually have a penny. So he's having to manipulate wealthy parents into letting him marry their daughter so he can murder her and then steal all their money. So I've got this interesting psychopathic character here who's very manipulative, very aware of what he's doing. And I had to think of him in terms of, I broke it down back then into conscious and subconscious. There's what he's saying and what his intention is. And then there's what he's feeling underneath. Like he might be feeling superior and confident that he knows his charm is going to win them over. Whereas later on in the film, where things start falling apart for him, he's trying to act like he's got it all together and trying to be demanding, but underneath there's this element of panic and I don't have any time. So there's what you're thinking and deeper down what you're feeling on the subconscious level. I think that's when I started to feel more that I was getting into the psychology of how a person behaves and then how I deliver that through the puppet.
And then there's the added layer of you have to then make sure that your performance and your interpretation is in line with what Tim Burton and Mike Johnson are expecting. You know, as they're doing that. And I'm curious, like how obviously this movie was almost 20 years ago at this point. Like how were those ideas, emotions, goals communicated to you? And then you're set there just to accomplish the daily or the, you know, the thing that you need to make to then get back to them where they say, yeah, good job. And to your point, if you blink, you miss 2 hours worth of work. So I'm curious about like how, as you're channeling those performance goals through and then breaking them down into you know, okay, I need to accomplish this shot in 4 days and it's gonna require this many frames and this camera movement's happening. How did all of those things start to line up in your head?
Yeah, well, if you think that it's going to take me a whole 10-hour day to do about 1.5 or 2 seconds worth of work, I need to get a very clear description and feeling from the director or directors on what they want and what they're after. So for example, Tim Burton is much more about the general mood and ambience of that moment in the movie, in the story, whereas Mike Johnson would give me much more specific details about the characters, not just feeling but feelings, details, hand gestures, details with it might be if there's going to be a squint in the eye or a clenching of the fingers or followed by a release of rage, and Mike would get more into those details, whereas Tim would be more that shot generally within the bigger picture of the film. I take on board both of those things, for example, and work out how I could go into even more detail, because I'm doing this frame by frame. So I'm always going to be more detailed than what they're giving me. They're giving me an overview, really, with a few specifics they may want. And I've got to really feel it out. And especially back on Corpse, I would really, in slow motion, almost repeat and repeat with my body what the character's doing, so I could feel all the muscles clench as the character then tensed up to release their rage or whatever the release might be. And I'd be analyzing exactly when one of my eyes was squinting more than the other, or I'd raise one of my elbows more than the other before. When did my eyes open and my mouth pop open as my hands popped open with expression? So I would be repeating and repeating it. And I can tell you now, doing to try and feel what the character's feeling and put that into the puppet in a more visceral way. And I remember doing some stuff with Barkis when he was really almost hyperventilating in panic later on because he needs to get out of there and things are going wrong. So I'm acting out this hyperventilating thing and obviously flooding my body with too much oxygen in the process. And so I was actually really wired at the end of the day because I'd been living out in my body what I need to project through the puppet's body. So that was my way of trying to be who they were and then project it through the puppet. Especially back then, I don't think now with my experience, I don't go quite into that level of being the puppet, but yeah, that was my method at the time. Definitely, I had to feel what the puppet's feeling.
For the listeners at home, I just got a beautiful just pantomime rendition of all of the hand placements and the clenching of every muscle and whatnot. And it's just really interesting because it's something we don't think about. It's usually like, oh, the animator just goes and moves the puppet and takes a picture. And that's not the case at all. I mean, like, especially as technology is changing and the expectations of what we want from stop motion are so much more, every nuance of the performance is just held accountable in a way that it never used to be.
The expectations are higher, yeah. And I can tell you another thing. Every director is different and they're not all as good at expressing what they want or communicating details as each other. So me being able to repeat back to the director, do you mean like this? And if I can kind of do it with my own body and radiate it to them, I'm kind of showing them with my own body, do you mean the character moves and feels like that? So they've not just got the words back and forth, they've also got me acting it out in front of them, and they can say that's a bit too much or a bit too little. Or so it's actually just communication between two people. They're telling me what they're after. I'm trying to say to them, have I is this the sort of thing you're looking for? So it's me performing it with my hands and my face scrunching up is also a communication device with the director, so that they feel as comfortable as possible that I've got what they want. I've at least understood what they want.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like in the sense that you're all right, here's my performance. That's great. Now do it at 24 frames per second with that action figure.
Yeah, that's a different part of the art, which I think you need to do a lot of hours of stop motion or other animation to get into. That gets a bit more technical, but yes. Like I say, there's a time delay between just doing it and then trying to do it microscopically, frame by frame.
Awesome. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, I got kind of two lines of questioning I'm going back and forth on, but I'm curious specifically about your relationship with different directors and the way in which those processes change. Because it's interesting to me, like in the sense that, if we look at Tim Burton as an example, Nightmare Before Christmas is not directed by Tim Burton. He produces it. It's directed by Henry Selick, who, for the record, graduated from Syracuse University, just FYI. And then he works on Corpse Bride with Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson is the director of one of my favorite animated pieces, which is the Primus video for Devil Went Down to Georgia. And then he, works on Corpse Bride, and you have that sort of relationship. And then Tim Burton ends up directing in its entirety Frankenweenie, for which you worked on two of those three pieces, right?
Yeah, well, Frankenweenie 2 had Trey Thomas as the animation director, who was on Nightmare animating Sally predominantly, and he did Bone Jangles in Corpse Bride. So Trey had done two films with Tim as one of the lead animators. So Trey was the natural fit to be the animation director in the same way that Henry Selick was on Nightmare and Mike Johnson was on Corpse. It was Trey on Frankenweenie.
Awesome.
So yes, Tim is like the overview director of the whole film, and he's got a guy who's there with every detail on every day, managing us in the studio. The animation director.
And was it similar with Wes Anderson and Isle of Dogs? Was Wes? Did he have an animation director under that, or were the directions coming directly from Wes?
Both. You've got An animation director. You've got Mark Gustafsson, who is the animation director on Fantastic Mr. Fox, and he was also the co-director with Guillermo del Toro on Pinocchio. Mark Gustafsson. And you've got Mark Waring on Isle of Dogs, who's the animation director. Now, on both occasions with Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs, the animation director is dealing with the animators every single day. They're like our team leader, and they're our main point of conversation to present things to Wes. But Wes is absolutely hands-on. He conducts most everything by email, but I believe he has about 5 or 7 laptops in his office, whereby he's talking to all the different departments back and forth all day. So it's almost like the animation director is my conduit to discuss what ideas we present to Wes and take Wes's feedback, and then I act on that. They're really helping me communicate with Wes, but believe me, Wes is on every single detail, and Wes is absolutely a details guy. So it's all about having a whole list of bullet points of all the details Wes wants, when he wants them, and making sure that I hit them. So it's a completely different way of working for Wes Anderson than say Tim Burton.
Yeah, so let's I guess I'm just trying to set this up a little bit. So like we've got I did not realize that Mark had been the one who you worked with for Isle of Dog and for Fantastic Mr. Fox and for Pinocchio. So that through line is making sense.
No, 2 different Marks. You've got the Mark Gustafsson, who is our animation director on Fox, and he's co-director on Pinocchio. But just to really confuse you, Mark Waring was animation supervisor on Fox and on Frankenweenie, and animation director on Isle of Dogs. So we do go around and bump into the same people on different things.
Yeah, and what I'm learning is that I need to make sure that I verify the marks in the animation industry because my notes are wrong. But so let's just talk about this for a second, in the sense that you've got. I really appreciate your anecdotes about kind of when working on Corpse Bride and expressing, here's the performance that I'm trying to give with these puppets, and then getting the thumbs up, going and doing that. And from what I understand, working on Pinocchio, similar in the sense that there's a lot more dialogue about, here's what I'm trying to do. I heard one interview where you talked about, oh, that's what okay, in order to accomplish that, I need a little bit more budget time. I need, X number more frames to be able to accomplish that sort of thing. And you're also sort of thinking like a cinematographer in that film a little bit too, where you're choosing those things. Working for Wes Anderson, I guess I want to start with that one though, where there's obviously a very specific aesthetic. You can watch any Wes Anderson movie silent and you instantly know it's a Wes Anderson movie. And I've seen shots where, you say Wes is communicating with you via email. As he's saying, I want this, this, and this, is he also sending you video, like LAVs, live action videos of like, this is what I'm expecting, or is everything communicated via text?
Yeah. For the audience, a live action video is a term we use where we film ourselves to use as reference. And it was very, very useful on Fantastic Mr. Fox, where Wes Anderson would film himself for every single shot to give us a very clear view of here's how he wants the movement to be, which you can imagine in terms of the director and the animator communicating. That gives you a very clear reference. And sometimes I can film it myself, which with Guillermo del Toro, I'd film myself to send to Guillermo, and he could then bounce back off that what he did or didn't like. So again, it's just about getting a clear understanding between the two of us about what they're after. I'm drifting away from your question. You're asking about Wes and details and labs, weren't you?
And and how they're communicated to you in general and how you respond to those things. Like,
yeah. They're not really there to just copy frame by frame. The cool thing with doing a lab is that you can film yourself and try out the performance 4 or 5 times in just a few minutes. And of course, the animation, we've already established how slow it is to do. So it's a quick way of trying out ideas. And there'll be certain things that you spontaneously do when you try out a performance that you go, oh, I didn't expect that, but that's quite useful. What do you think of that? And the director might say, we'll use the first bit from your second lav, and then we'll use the end bit from your third lav. So it's like having a couple of takes that can inspire conversation ideas for how you move forward. It's never there to copy. Just a quick way of trying ideas out. And some directors prefer them more than others. So different directors have got different ways of working. I guess the big thing is for me, I've got to adapt to what's the director's comfort zone for communication, and I've got to try and fit in with that, because they've got to talk to a whole bunch of different animators. It could be 20 different animators, so we've all got to accommodate what the director wants. But yeah, for Wes, he on Fox anyway, he really liked to film himself for everything, or he'd often send me a photograph of his hand holding a cup or holding a dish, so I could see what kind of hand shape he wants for how to hold it. He'd be as specific as how he wants a glass held in the hand. So I'm there to give Wes exactly what he's looking for, and he's normally very exact in what he is after.
I love the fact that there is a Wes Anderson movie out there that is literally Wes Anderson filming scenes from his stop motion movies as himself.
Yes, I want to see that cut.
Yeah, I want to. That'll make it to YouTube at some point. So you've like in I'm just using Isles of Dogs as an example because I think there's some interesting stuff that comes up. But you're a murderer. You killed somebody with wasabi poison in that movie,
yes.
if I recall.
It's not the first death scene I've done. Did I do the bit where I didn't do the shot where he dies, but I did do the shot where the chef puts the poison wasabi into the sushi. Yes,
you did, and it's a beautiful sequence. I was watching it today for listeners at home. There's a sequence where you have a sushi chef, and you're seeing a lot of the imagery from a first person perspective, and then it cuts to, I believe, the part that you were working on, Tim, where you're seeing the person prepare it as a little to-go container, essentially, to wrapped in a bag very beautifully. And that scene in particular is like, even when you look at the Blu-ray, like, and you look at the special feature, like they take a picture of you like working on that shot as like the imagery for it. But I'm curious about, for like sequences like that are just so particular, very lengthy. I mean, is the whole shot 10 seconds, 15 seconds? Like, it's pretty...
The one with the sushi chef packing the sushi into a box and into a bag, 16 seconds. I did it in 4 days, so 4 seconds a day. If you watch that video of me animating it, you'll see my t-shirt changes 4 times. I know the first person one, which wasn't me, that was Andy Biddle, and then it was finished by Tony Farquhar Smith. They took about, I'm going to say 2.5 months to animate that, the bit where you see the sushi being chopped up, and that was about 2.5 months, plus a load of practices as well. So that's a different kind of marathon. I've done some epic long shots before, but that's a different kind of commitment.
Okay, so 16 seconds, 4 days, 4 t-shirts. I guess what I'm curious about is as you're
I wear a different t-shirt every day. That's what we clarified here. Yes, I come in fresh, guys.
Yeah, you're very well socialized for an animator. Good job, Tim. But I guess what I'm curious about is as you're working on those scenes. So for anybody who hasn't seen Isle of Dog, it's very much a scene that is a very memorable shot within the film. And I guess what I'm curious about is, like, as you are entrusted with these sequences, do you know their significance? Like, obviously culturally you'll never know that, but in the grand scheme of the narrative of the film, how aware are you of how important this particular shot is going to be when you're working on it for 4 days to wrap up sushi in a bag?
Yeah, I think at that stage with that one, I was aware this is a kind of iconic looking Wes Anderson shot. But I really took it in my stride. Even the fact that I was doing a time lapse where I was animating myself at the same time as animating the puppet, it was almost like another day at the office on that. But I was aware this is a really cool, interesting, and vintage Wes shot. I think ones where I was aware I was doing something really big and special would be Corpse Bride. I did the wedding scene where Barkis is giving a speech at the wedding table. Everyone is sitting along the table looking half asleep and absolutely uninterested and bored. And the camera just slowly tracks along the table towards Barkis as he gives his speech. That was a 30-second shot. It's the second longest shot in the film. It's got lots of acting all the way through it, and I wasn't really meant to make a mistake and go back and redo anything. And I was aware, okay, if this is a 30-second shot, all focused on the lead bad guy, that's going to be a fairly major moment in the film. And I really felt the responsibility and the trust on my shoulders. I took it as a challenge, but I was aware this is a big thing. Yeah. I think nowadays I'd be much more relaxed about something like that. But back then, when I was only 28 and it was my first big feature film, it was an honor to be given something like that, but you're also feeling the responsibility on your shoulders.
That's awesome. And let's I wish I had more questions about Frankenweenie. Tim is wearing a Frankenweenie crew hoodie right now, and I feel like that to me is one of his just one of the most underappreciated stop motion films in general. But well, let's
Disney
talk about
don't like black and white.
What was that?
Disney don't like black and white.
Yeah, it's so strange. So yeah, so if you haven't seen it, Tim Burton made one of his original films was Frankenweenie, about this dog coming back to life, and he makes a stop motion film of it that he directs, or at least has directing credit for. There's another Mark that's involved, right? No, you gave me the name.
Waring was the animation supervisor. Trey was the animation director.
Sorry,
get the right credits, you guys.
Yeah, my bad, Trey. I love your work. So he goes and he makes this movie that's it's a stop motion film entirely in black and white that is just so remarkable. I mean, there's not a beat in that movie that just does not have wonder in it. It's just such a great piece.
And by the way, for those that are fans, we shot it in in color. I think it's the way they used to do black and white films. They'd use a limited palette, so it's all shot in color, and they used whatever software it was to do a black and white render afterwards. But so everything was lit in color, but then checked in black and white as well to see how the conversion would laid out. But it's quite weird to see some of the original shots with green grass. They do exist.
Oh, that's really funny. Well, how did you end up making it to that particular project? Like, one of the questions I have here, and it's probably less important later on in your career, but like, how do you interview for a stop motion animator job? Like, what does that look like?
Well, there's less need for it as I go on in my career, because I've obviously got a bigger and broader body of work. But in the early days, my very first job, I did a one-day interview where I had to animate for 1 day to a bit of dialogue. Corpse Bride, I did a 3-day interview, and that was a big pressure because I was used to doing 10, 15 second a day kid shows, which, as we've established, is very fast and very low quality churned out stuff. And to then go and do an interview where you're trying to do 2 seconds of animation a day, and it's an established style. It's so it's basically trying to see, can you look at the shots we've already done, and can you replicate that style with the characters? So that was a big jump for me, going to much higher quality and working much slower to get there. And then, for example, after Corpse, I did an interview. My next time going back to Aardman Animations was to do Creature Comforts USA, which is lots of talking plasticine animals. And even though I'd done Corpse Bride, I was a pretty established animator by this stage. I hadn't done any plasticine, so I needed to do a dialogue test with a talking lion. I think it was a lion, where I'm having to sculpt the mouths and deal with plasticine eyelids. So it's not really a case of can I animate, it was a case of can I animate with plasticine. And there's definitely been times in my career where, whether I'm working with fabric or felt or sculpting plasticine in a completely different style to the Aardman style, for Chuck Steele, for example, which is a film with a very different shaped faces to the classic Nick Park style. you're basically coming into a new environment, and the audition is to try and demonstrate, can you adapt your work to fit in with our style of work? So I tell you what, maybe a way of looking at it would be, if you're a painter, if you're Vincent van Gogh and you can do Van Gogh paintings really well, and you go for a job interview to work for Picasso, can you adjust your style to do it Picasso's style? It's so I see myself less as an artist and more as a craftsman who has to come in and because don't forget, I'm one of maybe 20 animators, 25 animators on a film. So we all need to work to as similar a style as possible. And when we can talk about Chicken Run in a bit, but it was a lot of work learning to animate the style of the original Chicken Run. So I would say that's a good way to look at an animation audition. It's basically coming in and they give you a go to see if you can do the job the way they want it.
That's really cool. I had no idea that it was that in depth. I mean, it has to be, right? They're investing in you for 10 months. You got to make sure that the person can survive a day there.
Yeah. If you look at my Fantastic Mr. Fox test on my first days, I was doing it very much in a Corpse Bride kind of style. And the Wes Anderson style of movement is not all smooth and subtle and flowy. Wes Anderson is much more move, pause, move, pause, move, pause. So you get it wrong a little bit to begin with while you're trying to find the right balance. I like to think of it as the Goldilocks and the porridge. You didn't get the porridge wrong. You either got it a bit too hot or a bit too cold, and you need to make an adjustment and have conversation about, that porridge is a bit too cold. Try doing it a bit more like this. That's my way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I find, I think about you as like, I don't know, the animation field is the Wild West, and you're a hired gun who goes and works for whoever's doing doing the bidding at that point in time. And you're so good about being able to just like meander through the different mediums, whether it's the the sort of traditional wireframe, characters with fur on them, or with plasticine or clay, being able to do replacement faces on Pinocchio, and then also have, my language might be incorrect, but like Geppetto's face is like mechanized, right? And it has,
Yeah.
you're using little screwdrivers or little components to sort of move those faces around. Whereas, in other interviews, you've referenced certain people who are used to one particular type of animation, and that ability to just wade through to a new employer is kind of difficult. And then even working in felt, stuff like that when you're working on the house. Like I'm curious about like if we move on to like Pinocchio, it seems like it's the culmination of a lot of different types of animating that you have been picking up over the years, kind of culminates into that film. What sort of strengths do you think you brought to the table for that film, and what sort of either weaknesses did you like notice other animators not having, or that you needed to find yourself building in yourself to be able to be successful? Because that was obviously a huge, what did you say, a second and a half per shooting day was kind of what you were aiming for?
Yeah, goodness. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the strengths that I brought, I probably was one of, if not the most experienced, one of the most experienced with mechanized heads. As you say, that Geppetto's head is made out of silicon rubber, and it's got various ball and sockets under the lips, under Geppetto's moustache, under his eyebrows, so you can move them around with your fingers and twist them, or maybe put Allen keys in the ears to make the jaw mechanism go up and down. I've had a lot of experience with that. A lot of the guys in Portland, Oregon are used to the 3D printed faces, which is like taking a mask off the character and putting a different mask on, which is what Pinocchio had, a whole series of different masks every time his face changes. And it was literally a pizza box that all the Pinocchio faces went in, as our library of Pinocchio faces. I mean, but I do think in terms of what can I bring, what can I not bring? I mean, I've still got to copy the style of Pinocchio and Geppetto that other people have established. So I've got to, but I was quite used to this by now, coming into a different production, seeing how Geppetto moves, how Pinocchio moves, how can I replicate that, how much is too much. I feel that's just what I see the start of a job as doing. Let me quickly do the research into how you do things here, and let me have a go at replicating that. That's how I see myself. I obviously bring my own creativity to the show, but I've got to do it within certain parameters. And you know what? The positive comes from the negative. In those early days when I was really struggling to get work as a young actor, trying to get your first acting gig, to see it like that, I was going from one company to another back in the United Kingdom, working on different programs for a short period of time, because I just wanted to get work anywhere I could do, and I was struggling. Sometimes I'd get 2 days on a show. Some days I'd get 2 weeks on a show, and then I'd be out of work for 2 months. So I was having to come into different environments, work with different directors, puppets I'd never touched before, but worked in different ways, and trying to quickly learn how things work here, what the director's after, and can I do that? So the years of me struggling to stay in a job and traveling around is how I developed this adaptability. And yes, some people have mostly worked for one company, so they're less able to adapt to different ways of doing things. It's a pro and a con. I might have drifted away from Pinocchio a bit on that, in terms of what I brought to the table, but I think I was a fairly reliable hand to bring in and learn their style.
I mean, you were trusted with some, as always, the theme in your career is that you're trusted with like really notable sequences. I mean, the discovering of the pine cone, like is one of your scenes, right? I mean, that's pretty cool. And I'm not trying to pose a question that belittles any other animators, but I just think it's really interesting that like, whereas some people end up in a studio and they get really good at animating the way Leica needs, or the way in which Aardman needs for these types of things, or whatever. That's a bad example, but like, you get into a studio and you learn how to do it the Disney way, you learn how to do it the Tim Burton way, you learn how to do it the Leica way, and you're just all over the place. Like, you're like, hey, you got my number, cool, I'll come hang out with you. And I just think it's really interesting. But I want to
can I just come back on that? I would just say the positive and the negative with me on that is that the positive is I'm a very good jack of all trades. I'm very adaptable. I can come into a different environment and I can figure it out and try and replicate that style and fit in. And I also don't get too involved in the politics, because I see myself a bit more like a fly on the wall. The negative of it is that I will never be the best at anything. If I go to Aardman, there'll be guys that know the Aardman style so much better than me. I go to Pinocchio, there's people that have already been there for 18 months before me, so they know it really, really well. So if I go to do a children's series, there's always people that are faster than me, for example. So I can be pretty good at most things in terms of styles of animation, but there's always people that are better than me at certain things. And then there'll be some people that aren't as versatile as me. So it's you win and you lose with these things. You can't be the best at everything. I'm able to adapt to most things. That's my strength.
Well, that just gave me a perfect segue there, Tim, because your adaptability has also turned you into a fairly renowned educator in the stop motion space. And when we were first scheduling this, you were like, hey, gotta going to Greece, gonna teach some more people. And then you travel all over the world to be able to teach people, and also kind of get companies to do sort of fun alternative ways of bonding with stop motion and things like that. And I'm curious how you found yourself in the education space and decided that teaching stop motion was something that you had a passion for.
Well, again, one of these things where you sort of happens by accident, or lack of opportunity leads to you giving something else a go. I'd only been animating for about 2 years when I was asked to go back to my university to give a talk. And I was terrified. We mentioned about imposter syndrome earlier. Why would around 50 people listen to me for an hour was how I felt. And I was terrified that I'd be wasting everyone's time and they'd realize I was a complete fraud. I thought, well, all I can do is talk about something I do know, which was my experience of graduating and trying to get my first job and how that went and what it was like. And I then basically work was really quiet early in my career. So I was offered another teaching job back at that university where I studied myself, running the stop motion department. Again, I felt I was too young to be settling down teaching, but work was quiet. And what I had learned was that communicating about animation, like being able to talk through what was and wasn't effective with some of the student shots, that in itself was a very useful skill. So being able to describe what we're after, describe, I like to use the word what's effective, what's not so effective, like the porridge being too hot or too cold. I adamantly try and avoid something being right or being wrong, because that elicits the wrong reaction from people. If you tell someone is wrong, they inherently tend to feel quite threatened and turned off. So I quickly went, okay, well, animation works a bit quiet right now, but learning to get better at communicating about animation, that's a skill that could be good to nurture. And I went back to animate, and years later, after Corpse Bride, I was asked to come and give a talk about. Again, I talked about my own experience going from graduating, getting my career going, and eventually working on the big dream of working on a Tim Burton film, having been a Nightmare Before Christmas fan myself, and a bit of what that was like. I came at it from a personal storytelling perspective, which I think relaxes people. Well, I say this now with hindsight. I know that talking from a personal perspective makes an audience feel they relate to you more. Back then, I more felt comfortable talking about my personal experience because I didn't want to be pretentious enough to pretend I knew more than I did. But that led to me doing guest lecturing at universities over the years, talking about Corpse and then many other films I'd worked on as I did stuff. But I was quite happy being a bit of a guest speaker. And to come back to your original question as to where we are now, about 10 years ago, I was asked to do an animation workshop, which is, to define that's other people coming to animate and me giving them exercises and structuring a class whereby they've got a clear brief from me and they're learning by actually doing it. And that grew and grew, and I say grew and grew. I mean, I had to buy some extra laptops and some cameras and some puppets to facilitate doing it, because believe me, it's better you come with your own equipment than rely on somebody else's. And before you knew it, I worked my way up to about 14 laptops and 15 puppets and a whole bag full of webcams, and you're a mobile classroom. So that grew and grew, and as you say, it could go into different directions. It's been corporate workshops for team building. I go to different countries, to festivals, to give a talk or give workshops. And more recently, I thought, you know what, I can do a much better job if I don't take my classroom in a suitcase, but I actually do it where I live in London City Island, which is in the Docklands part of East London. People come to me, and I can then have much more equipment for them to use. I've got all my memorabilia from different productions to show them, and I can give them a much better experience. And I think of it more as an experience than just a classroom. Although obviously the class has to be top notch, otherwise that's the meat of why they're there. But that's grown from a good 10 years of doing stop motion workshops and really seeing what people respond to, because some things they might go in the wrong direction, or what's the best way to describe something in a simple way for people to get their heads around it. What resonates with people? What's the best way for them to absorb information, especially when we've got a short period of time for me to give an example, them to try it themselves, and what are they going to actually remember at the end of the week? How do our brains work for retaining information? I found so. Man, I've given you a long-winded journey, but I now see teaching in very much a sense of how do we learn? How do we absorb information? What's the best way of describing things? And getting people to describe it themselves and describe it to each other. They're also their brains are working and their brains are processing and understanding just by trying to describe it themselves. So it becomes a very interactive thing.
And it's really fun to read reviews from your students who are talking about their experiences. They're all very positive, and talking about sort of what their takeaways are. And it seems that the experiential part, and I don't even necessarily mean animating, but I mean the like recognizing yourself as a character seems to be one of the most useful lessons that people see. Like I was watching a video of everybody just squatting down. You got your feet flat on the floor, you're kneeling down, and you're asking them like, what do you feel? What do you notice? Like it's this like, let's take this inward look is 90% of the lesson. And then the technology and figuring out how this works and thinking one frame at a time, that'll get picked up eventually, but we need to start with this exploration of self, which I just really appreciate within your lessons, because I think so many times people are, I'm going to teach this new thing, and they instantly get to like, okay, the end product's here. Here's the closest I can get you to the end product. You finish the marathon. Whereas you're taking it completely a step back and you're like, I don't really care about the end product. I care about the journey along the way. And if you can appreciate that journey, you'll be successful at this.
Yeah, I mean, the sad truth is, I mentioned about the 10,000 hours thing. I mentioned about how many hours I did this. I animated in my very first animation job. Now, when you've only got 2, or the ones I do in London are 5 days with people, you don't have the gift of the hours of doing it. And there's only so much you can tell people before they need to try it for themselves. So it has to be this balance between a couple of clear explanations, then you have a quick go. And I'd rather just have a quick go, like an hour tops, and get their heads around it a bit more. And they'll get it a bit wrong, but then we'll do something else which is the same or similar, and they'll know it a bit more. It's the Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off from Karate Kid kind of thing of do it until it becomes more instinctive. And well, maybe it's just me, but I can only remember about 3 new ideas at once. So I try and have just a few simple ways of approaching it. And before you try it, and then we can go a bit deeper, and then you try that, and then we can go a bit deeper, and then you try that. And each time people won't get it perfectly right, but the next time they'll be better at knowing what to look for that wasn't working. And Ryan, I'll tell you what, it evolved over the 10 years of trying to teach acting, teach performance. And what I immediately started realizing was that people had no idea about balance, for example, or they couldn't, with a puppet, you've got to move the whole body at once. They would just move the head or the arm. They try and, because it's just too much to think about. So it became clear I had to backtrack to get people to understand a bit about anatomy, how the body moves together as one, and how balance works before we build on that to do acting. So it's like understanding anatomy a bit more, understanding balance. That's the foundation. You build your foundation before you make your beautiful house. And if I didn't do it in that order, the house was falling down. If the foundations weren't right, everything above the foundations was in trouble. Was what I learned. So it's come from my own trial and error and seeing how people respond to things. And one last thing, you talked about feelings. Well, I mean, I'm very, very interested these days in our brains, in the human body, our body language, and the way we hold our body will affect the way we feel, and it will affect the way other people feel about us, the way people judge us, because we make assumptions about each other just in the first moment of seeing someone. So everything to do with how we physically move our body will affect how we feel inside, and it will affect how the person next to us interprets it. So all of this stuff about anatomy and balance is also a slowly building foundation for um, for performance, and I mean that as much in an instinctive and subconscious way of um, how we feel inside and how others interact with us, as much as the I mentioned subconscious and conscious bits earlier on. What we're consciously trying to say and do, I'm more talking about what makes us feel good, what makes us feel comfortable, what makes us feel safe, versus the opposite of what makes us feel unsafe, what makes us feel nervous, what makes us feel tense. So all of that, and you can see why this starts to become quite psychological in the way that I teach. But it's taking the initial issue of balance and anatomy and then slowly building it into performance.
It's awesome. And I just really feel like we need those types of resources. There's been multiple references today about the fact that, Toy Story came out in 95. That was the year that I started my career. It's amazing. I still have a job in stop motion. And I feel like your passion going out and being demonstrated and taught to other people and others understanding the work that goes into this is what helps keep these types of art forms alive as technology becomes such an integral part of all creative procedures. In stop motion, there's still a hope that you're only going to be thinking about things 1/24th of a second at a time, because that's half the beauty of it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm obviously probably more known now for my teaching as much as my public speaking at festivals as I am for the films that I've worked on. But again, it all kind of happens through meandering opportunities or lack of opportunities that led me in a slightly different direction. And there's definitely been times in my career where I've had to think, I'm doing a bit too much teaching at the moment. I'm getting away from actually animating. Or there's other times where, man, I've been in a dark studio for the last 2 years. It'd be quite nice to go out and talk to people. So there's times where I think, okay, I'm going to try and steer the ship in a slightly different direction and see if I can find opportunities in that direction and do a bit less of the opportunities that are taking me down a path I'm trying to steer away from a bit. But I wouldn't be able to say that much of this was a conscious decision where I am now. I think you're going with the flow to an extent and making judgments as to a bit more of this, a bit less of that, as you do so. Yeah.
As Well, what I was going to say is, that I think it's just interesting that theme of balance is something that you have to be hyper focused on, and that's the first thing that you're teaching students about, right? But you, for the last, if I'm calculating it, 8 months or so, have been working, or let me rephrase. For 8 months or so, you were working on a film that's coming out in by the time of this airing in just about a week and a half. You've been working on Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget, which is coming out December 15th on Netflix, and it's directed by Sam Fell, who directed Paranorman, and I believe we said directed Flushed Away.
Yeah.
And now is doing this sequel to Chicken Run that is coming out 20 years ish after the initial one. you're back at Aardman, and I don't know if I completely covered this for listeners at home. So for people who are, when we keep saying Aardman and we're talking about Morph and we're talking about Creature Comforts, I'm not sure we've quite done a good job of like describing it. But Aardman is a studio that's based in the UK. It started in the 70s, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And they were doing commercials. It's what Peter Lord and
Dave Sproxton.
Thank you, Dave Sproxton, and they wanted to start a stop motion studio. They created this employee-owned company that has been doing.
You mean in the 70s? In the 70s, they were teenagers when they started it.
Well, they were still employee-owned, right?
Well, yeah, that's very true. Yes. And now it's employee owned. Yes, yes.
Yeah, and I believe they got started because they got recognized by the BBC, and they started doing some work for that. But they eventually found another partner in the name of Nick Park, who created Wallace and Gromit. And their studio attained the recognition of Steven Spielberg, and they partnered with DreamWorks to do Flushed Away and Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit. But basically, to put it in perspective, this is a fascinating, really important company dedicated to the art of stop motion that has been going for a very long time and does a lot of really interesting projects. And you kick off your career not in animation but in some puppet making stuff with Rice Krispies, and now you're back there learning the Aardman way again with Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget. And I'm curious about how has it felt to like return to their playground again, to just sort of see what the feature film world is like in that space.
And it's my first time doing a feature film with them as well, because I'd done 6 months of Creature Comforts, which is animated talking with plasticine mouths, Nick Park style. So I was quite used to the animated talking. I'd done worked on a couple of series of Shaun the Sheep, so I was quite used to the style of how the bodies move, because that's not talking; it's all body language. Put the two together, and you've got walking, talking chickens. So I felt I came in pretty confident that I'd be able to pick up the style, but it was actually there was a big induction process. I had 4 weeks of testing, and initially I thought, do I really need 4 weeks? It's very, very kind of you that you feel the schedule's good enough that I can take 4 weeks. But goodness, I needed it. I really did, because if you think that the original Chicken Run, and there's quite a few of the animators who are on the original Chicken Run, there's a very set style for the shape of the necks, the shape of the beaks, the eyebrow, the whole eyebrow thing when they go into a frown and when they look anxious. Very specific shapes that you do and don't do. And let's not forget, we're sculpting plasticine to try and get these shapes. And what you can't have is 25 animators all sculpting Rocky or Ginger in a slightly different way. We need consistency amongst all the animators. So, even my first shots, I was comfortable with the acting, but I was checking all the time the eyelids, the shadow over the eyes, the shape of the neck as it curves into the beak, the shape of the eyebrow, they call it combs, the little plumage that Rocky has at the top of his hair, or the shape of that. So I was just checking everything was on model, is what we call it. And that was hard work to begin with, checking, is that the right shape? Is that shadow above the eyes right? Check. Whereas the acting I was comfortable with. And yeah, I had Chicken Run people who were happy to look over my shoulder, give me advice, but also tell me where I was going a bit wrong. It's that porridge, getting the balance right thing. So and let's be honest, on the face of it, I was super chuffed to be working on Chicken Run 2. The first one is a classic, and I've had so many people, you tell them you're working on Chicken Run 2 and you see their faces light up, because it came out in 2000. So there's a lot of people who were very young kids when this came out, who watched it to death when they were children, and now they're incredibly excited in their mid-20s that the sequel was coming out. So I want to keep that thing inside my heart of, I'm working on a cool project. I'm lucky to be here. Soak it up, Tim, and appreciate that you're lucky enough to be on this. Um, yeah, really proud of it.
That's awesome. And I know you've been doing some publicity for it, and you also have kindly signed a non-disclosure agreement. So we got to be very careful about the types of things that we talk about in regards to it. But I mean, I think at the heart of it, I think that it's really cool to just see stop motion animation always reinventing itself, but sticking to its roots. And here 20 years later, like Aardman or Netflix or whomever could have decided, all right, we're gonna sort of pay homage to this, but we're gonna go in a different direction, and we're gonna do it in CGI, or we're gonna do a two-dimensional, cell animated or flash animated type of product. And they're so dedicated to making sure that the spirit of the original is being carried on 20 years later to a whole new generation of people who can just binge watch it on repeat on Netflix.
Yeah, and well, it's a big responsibility for someone like Sam Fell, the director, who he was around at Aardman around when they were doing the first Chicken Run. I think he did one shot. He animated one shot on the first Chicken Run, he told me. So one of the chickens from behind, Rocky in the distance, I think, going off, he told me. So the responsibility is more on their side, and for someone like Sam to try and get it right. But he won't take that responsibility lightly. And the same with us animators, we want to do it justice. Maybe that's the best phrase. We want to, if we're going to do it, we want to do it justice. If you do it and there's so many people with a positive memory of the first Chicken Run film. I think the same with any classic film you try and do a sequel of, and we all can think of a few sequels that destroyed our memory of the original. So this doesn't do it. I've seen a test screening. It's fun. It's happy. It whizzes by. I really people were coming out of the test screening and go, wow, it's really good. And that's what I'm hearing as well from early reviews as well. I think they've done a very good job. I think, and Sam needed to take the original, but also make it his own. So it's a tough balance to strike. Guys, you can watch it for yourselves and judge, but I don't think there's going to be many people going home disappointed. I really like the film. I think they've done a very good job.
I mean, I love Chicken Run is one of the greatest homages to war movies of all time. I mean, you watch The Great Escape and then you watch Chicken Run and you're like, oh man, I feel like I just watched two versions of the best movie ever.
Yes.
And I'm very excited to see sort of what is paid homage to, and just the history of animation and the history of film that makes itself into Chicken Run Nugget. I think it's going to be great. So Tim, you've been remarkably sorry. I could mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just nodding because I'm so proud to be on the new version. But you've got to do something new, but you've also got to pay homage to the old thing. And I think they've struck the balance. I really, really do. Believe me, I've worked on films that were not turning out the way you might hope they are. And so this is one I really feel they've got the balance right. I'm not being endorsed or paid to say that. I'm really happy that I think Sam did a fantastic job. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say you've been so kind with your time today, and you have just given so much interesting perspective. Is there any topics or any ideas that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to either share with the audience or throw out there before we depart?
Oh, there's one thought that crossed my mind earlier, and we started, and then we moved on. And I think it's the fact that it comes back to the notion of adapting or knowing what you're doing, and you never fully know what you're doing. And in fact, if you completely knew what you're doing, it's hardly stimulating. And what I've really learned is to constantly be open to change based on the situation as it plays out in front of me. So maybe a simple way of it is to say, I tried to go in with a plan, but I'm absolutely aware that the part of the plan is that the plan is going to have to change. And I was thinking earlier about when I was giving my mentoring week in London just 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to deliver the next bit of information to prep the whatever the class is, and I can see maybe there's not enough oxygen there. I can suddenly see when a few people I've lost someone's attention or something, and I've got to change what I'm doing and move it on. Or I gave someone a brief and it's not going quite the way that I expected it to. And it'd be the same with me doing an animation shot, or the same with me planning how I hope my year is going to pan out, or what I'd like to focus on. It's this constant acceptance that I want to be clear what I'm trying to do, definitely. But being well aware that I'm going to have to change direction slightly, steer the ship in a slightly different direction as I go. I've actually come to embrace that, rather than that being that my plan wasn't good enough in the first place, or well, it's not about reading the room badly. It's or getting the situation wrong. It's recognizing that in this particular situation, this isn't quite going the way I expected it to. I need to change course or make an adjustment. And that's years ago, I would have felt that I was getting things wrong. Now I recognize that's completely part of the process. You've got to be somewhat fluid and go with it. Like you hadn't got every bullet point of this interview completely nailed, because you don't know half of what I'm going to say. And I'm going to answer one question that you were planning in 3 questions time, and you're going to have to keep deviating as you go as well. So recognizing amount of go with the flow and being completely comfortable with that, and not taking it as a personal critique on myself, has been a very good part of my process. Don't know how much I took your interview off course on various places, but that, as you know, that's how it goes.
And absolutely. And if it went as predicted or as hoped, none of us would learn anything new, and that would just be a waste of our time. So I'm okay with the way in which this is processed, Tim. I think we did great.
If it all went exactly as we expected, then well, where's the fun in that, eh?
Absolutely, it's not. But speaking of fun, for anybody who is interested in following your fun and your journey, where do they find you online? What's the best way to keep up with Tim Allen?
Well, my handle for most things is Tim Allen Animation on X, which we now have to say in a long version, formerly known as Twitter. It's just Tim Animation, because they wouldn't let me have enough letters. But everything's Tim Allen Animation. My website's currently down. I've been too busy to look into it, but that's timallenanimation.co.uk. But you'll find that if you go to Instagram or anything else. And I will put things online as and when I get a gap in between my wonderfully busy animation and teaching schedule, which is, there's not many gaps, but I update as I go.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a joy to sort of see what you're doing and catch those little glimpses, just between everything. Because I think that, if in the history of like almost any famous person, or any successful person, their biography gets really boring in the middle of their career because they're just too busy cranking out good stuff. Like that's the story.
And it's kind of true that my social media is like it kind of looks pretty good, my social media, from what people tell me, but it's a bit of I have to throw a post out every so often just because something I did is coming out and I need to do a thing to pay respect to the people I worked with, but I'm normally too busy doing the next thing, which is months ahead already. So social media is just me. There's no team of people managing my brand. It's me as a freelancer who only gets a spare 5 minutes to stick something out there.
Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking far more than 5 minutes to chat with us today. Thanks for coming on, Tim.
It's been a pleasure, Ryan. Thank you.
How wonderful is Tim Allen? What an absolute sweet, pleasant person. I'm so thankful that I got to connect with him. I hope you found his interview 1/10 as inspiring as I did. It's always wonderful to talk about history, craft, hearing stories about chance encounters. It's just fascinating the way in which we always add layers of complexity to what we think happens to these amazing creative people, and in reality, they're just working hard, and that is definitely what Tim Allen is doing. So, Tim, thanks so much for being on the show, coming all the way across the pond just to chat with us. It was a true honor. If you want to see Tim in action, please mark your calendars for December 8th to watch Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget, which will be broadcasting on Netflix. There's also a slew of other films that he's made, including Pinocchio, which you can watch on Netflix. Check out some of that stop-motion amazingness that he designed. Next week, we head to an equally fantastic place as we explore the land of Oz. I hear there's a wizard there, maybe a lost girl and her dog, a scarecrow, a tin man, and a lion, too. We'll be heading into the magical land of Oz with John Fricke. John is the foremost historian on The Wizard of Oz and Judy Garland. He's written a number of books and has done DVD commentary and Laserdisc commentary for The Wizard of Oz, as well as other Judy Garland films such as Meet Me in St. Louis and The Pirate. Please plan to come back on December 20th for the next episode of Meditations with Ryan Zlemek, where we're going to fly through a tornado and make our way to the Emerald City, and I am beyond excited to chat with Mr. John Fricke. If you like what you hear, please spread the word, like, subscribe, share, and most importantly, please review the show. Your support and publicity is what makes this podcast stay alive, and I truly appreciate your collaboration. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and please remember to make space for conversation because you just might learn something.